social services, but that is not my primary concern. I have two primary concerns when it comes to the Syrian refugees. One is obviously the fact that we can't screen them. And despite the Obama administration's protestations that yes, we have beautiful vetting procedures, right? The same vetting procedures that got you Major Nidal Hassan, the same vetting procedures that got you the Chattanooga, Tennessee shooter, the same vetting procedures that got you the Sarnia brothers, right? All of these vetting procedures, they say that they're going to do biometric scans, which are completely useless unless you actually have physical evidence of these people committing criminal acts elsewhere, right? You have nothing to scan them against. It's like saying they're going to fingerprint these folks. Well, unless you have fingerprints at a crime scene somewhere else, that doesn't make any difference. They say that they're going to interview them. What does that interview look like? I mean, really, what is that? They say apparently the people doing the interviews have 8 days of training on Syria, and then they're thrown right in. They say that they're going to do background checks. By calling whom? Who do you actually call? Do you call Bashar Assad and ask him for his information? Right? So it's nonsensical. People on Homeland Security Committee know this is nonsensical. Today, the House passed a bill curbing Syrian immigration after Homeland Security came and made a presentation. They actually lost votes after the Homeland Security presentation. So that's one issue. The other issue is, what is the nature of the immigrants that you're bringing in, period? And this is not a religious issue, it's a values issue. Are the people who you're bringing in going to make the country a better place, or are they going to make the country a more polarized place? Do they have any experience with Western-style democracy? Do they believe in any of the same American rights that we believe in, or not? And that's a very relevant question to ask about any immigrants and any class of immigrants. Now, do I think it's stupid to say you're not going to bring in 5-year-old orphans? Yes, I think that's dumb. But do I think that it's not stupid to say you ought to look at the values of the people that you're bringing in? I would say that about people of any religion. And the fact is that when you're talking about people who are coming from a place like Syria, which has no history of democracy, no history of human rights, no history of basic American rights like freedom of speech, no idea of what equality of sexes looks like, there's going to be a culture clash. Look at Europe. Europe is full of culture clash because of the vast wave of Muslim immigration. So on those two levels, I'm extremely worried about the Syrian refugee wave. And by the way, question for the Ummah, right, the Muslim nation that is supposed to take everybody in. There are 1 billion Muslims on planet Earth, and there are 52 Islamic majority countries on planet Earth. None of you have room for these folks? None of you? Right? Turkey is taking in about 2 million of them. 15% are still in refugee camps. The truth is that the Ummah has a pretty poor record of taking in refugees. Right? For all the talk about how it's the Israelis who are victimizing the Palestinians, for example, there are still, 70 years later, 10 refugee camps in Jordan. There are 13 refugee camps full of Palestinians in Syria. There are refugee camps in the south of Lebanon for Palestinians 2 generations after the creation of Israel. By contrast, Israel has taken in every wave of Jewish refugees that has ever existed. So you know, I'm getting tired of hearing the sort of unearned moral superiority of the Muslim world when it comes to, oh, you Westerners, you have to take our refugees.
Ben writes, what is the best way to handle the refugees coming out of Syria? Have there been studies showing that refugees do better when they stay in their country, or any negative effects for coming to new countries? The best way to handle the refugees coming out of Syria is to find countries that are Muslim and that are willing to take them in. I think it's a very silly idea that people who have grown up in an area that has no sense of Western civilization can immediately be transplanted to Western civilization and then thrive. If that were true, it would only exist in a world where Western civilization were in muscular fashion assimilating people. I say muscular, I don't mean forcibly assimilating people. I mean not providing them social benefits to live in small enclaves where all of their worldviews were reinforced by a multicultural ethos. That's what I mean. If you got rid of that, then you can assimilate a lot more people. The United States did this for centuries. Then the welfare system came about. It turned out assimilation's a lot harder when people get a check, even when they're not speaking the national tongue, even when they don't believe in the national value system. So, you know, the best move I think here would be to help integrate Syrian refugees into other countries. Honestly, I don't understand. Iran is backing Assad. Iran supposedly wants to be our friend now. Ha 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 ha. Why wouldn't Obama put pressure on Iran to accept Syrian refugees? Right? Why, if Obama thought what was going on in Syria was so bad and Iran's our new friend, why not pressure Iran? Turkey's already taken in 1 to 2 million, I think, Syrian refugees. That seems to me a better solution. Unfortunately, a lot of the Muslim world likes to keep refugees in prison camps, basically, so that they can use them as a political tool against the West. That's what the Palestinians have been about for the last 70 years. Recognize the fact that the Palestinians since 1948 have been living in refugee camps in Arab territories, literally, for 70 years. And that says something about the whole notion of the Islamic Ummah that's going to support their brethren. How about you start by getting rid of the refugee camps and assimilating the people who are the supposed refugees? I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.
Welcome back. Amid all the charges and countercharges over the body count in Gaza, one thing seems clear: more Palestinian children have been killed than Israeli soldiers. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reports that as of yesterday, 408 children had been killed. That's more than the 221 Israeli soldiers that have died in military operations over the past 8 years. Joining me now, Peter Beinart, CNN political commentator and a columnist for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, and Ben Shapiro, editor-in-chief of truthrevolt.org. Gentlemen, good to see both of you. Thanks for being here.
Alrighty.
Peter, let me start with you. We're talking about the issue of civilians and civilian deaths in Gaza. Let's listen again to what President Obama said about that today.
Sympathy for Hamas. I have great sympathy for ordinary people who are struggling within Gaza.
The president also reiterated the right of Israel to defend itself against rocket attacks. What did you make of his comments today?
He's exactly right. Israel does have the right to defend itself. It also needs some better guarantees against Hamas rockets. I was in Israel with my 6-year-old daughter during the first week of the war. We were in and out of shelters. It's very frightening. But ordinary Palestinians also need some relief from a blockade that has destroyed the Gazan economy and actually helped Hamas. The blockade has destroyed the independent business class in Gaza by making exports virtually impossible. It's made it very difficult for Gazan fishermen to go a few miles out beyond the coast. Beyond that being a humanitarian disaster, it actually strengthens Hamas by strengthening the climate of despair and hatred on which Hamas feeds.
No, it's impossible to know the real numbers. We just put up a graphic that shows all the disparities in terms of how many civilians have been killed. The two top numbers there are groups in Gaza. They say that 82 to 80% of the casualties have been civilians. The United Nations says 72% are civilians. Israel says only about 50%. So whose number should we trust?
I don't think we know the exact number. Israel says...
Hold on, Ben, this was for Ben. Can you hear me, Ben?
Please, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I can now. Thank you.
Go ahead. So
yeah, I mean, as far as whose numbers we should trust, I can tell you whose numbers we shouldn't trust. The same people who said that 5,000 people had been killed in Jenin, which was false, or the same people who said that 2/3 of the people killed in Operation Cast Lead in 2008-2009 were civilians, which turned out to be false, or the same people who have put out on Hamas TV that civilians should stick around in all of the buildings surrounding terrorist entities. I mean, those people are probably not the folks that you want to trust.
But are you talking about
in
Hamas
attributing
putting out the
civilian
numbers,
casualties.
or these human rights groups in Gaza?
I'm talking about human rights groups in Gaza, which are working with Hamas and Palestinian Authority sources in order to find those numbers. I mean, how do they get those numbers in the first place? You heard the fellow from the UN say just a little while ago that they are working with both Palestinian and Israeli sources. Well, the Palestinian sources they're working with on the ground in the Gaza Strip are in large part Hamas, Palestinian Authority, or Islamic Jihad sources who have a great interest in ensuring that the American people and that the rest of the world believe that a huge number of civilians have been killed, which it's the same reason why they're putting civilians in front of rockets on a regular basis.
Look, Peter, if I could jump in,
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, I'm interested in your thoughts on this debate about who is responsible for the deaths of these innocent Palestinians. Obviously, Israel carrying out the military campaign, some individuals, some critics saying it's disproportionate, not as accurate as it should be. And then you do have evidence that Hamas, or at least militants in Gaza, are firing from population centers, firing from adjacent hospitals. Do you think that it's fair to blame Hamas for the deaths of Palestinians in Gaza?
I don't at all that Hamas is pursuing a strategy that is likely to increase civilian casualties by operating from urban areas. I think Israel is bombing an area which is very, very densely populated with some weapons that are not all precision weapons, and so it's inevitable that a lot of innocent civilians are going to die. And regardless of the number, you know, the Talmud says that whoever destroys a single human life, it is as if he destroyed an entire world. So I'm not so interested in the specific numbers. What interests me is, was there a political strategy that could have been pursued against Hamas that would have made so this war would not have been possible? What I find most tragic is that when you have peaceful, nonviolent resistors in the West Bank. They are repeatedly imprisoned by Israel, and so Palestinians get the message that, in fact, nonviolence doesn't work. The real way to weaken Hamas is to show that people who accept Israel's right to exist and pursue their grievances nonviolently, as people in villages like Bilin and Nabi Saleh have been doing for a decade now, that they get results. And tragically, this Israeli government has not done that.
Ben, do you want to take a crack at that?
Sure. I mean, the nonsensical idea that Hamas is firing rockets because somehow they're mad about imprisonments in the West Bank, or that they would stop firing rockets if Israel were to release the prisoners that it holds, is nonsensical and idiotic. In fact, Israel has just done multiple prisoner releases with regard to terrorists vis-a-vis Israeli soldiers, and that has not seemed to quell anything with regard to Hamas. When Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip in 2005, that launched the election of Hamas and then further violence. The idea that if Israel makes more and more concessions, that will somehow not embolden Hamas as opposed to creating a movement against Hamas, that has not been proved by history in any way, shape, or form. Peter always finds a way to ensure that Israeli policy is somehow responsible for rockets falling on Israeli cities when it's really Hamas doing the firing.
I'm actually talking about Palestinians who protest nonviolently in conjunction with Israelis. I mean, the irony to me is that actually Ben and Hamas have an enormous amount. Hamas doesn't believe that Jews should be allowed to live in the state of Israel. Ben has said that Palestinians don't have the right to live in Israel, West Bank, or Gaza, because he's called for physically expelling all of them. So, in fact, the true moral and ideological partners, Ben, are you and Hamas.
Ben, go ahead.
That is absolute nonsense, Peter.
You didn't write that
my position on Israel was made clear in the 2013 column, and to call me equivalent with people who are murdering Jews is insanity. It's beyond insulting. And if there's anybody who's emboldening Hamas to kill more children, it is you, because it is your policies which have emboldened Hamas. They know that people like you are going to get on American television and talk about how the Palestinians are meek victims, and whenever they fire rockets, it can be justified by Israeli policy. Hamas celebrates every moment you're on television, Peter.
It's impossible to have this conversation, obviously, without some level of inflammatory rhetoric. But we thank both of you for your perspective on this. Ben Shapiro, Peter Beinart, and Jake, thanks so much for being there in Jerusalem. We'll see you tomorrow.